The sun hung mercilessly over Dustwood Creek, casting long shadows across the weathered buildings that lined Main Street. Loner Rancher adjusted his worn hat as he guided his horse toward the general store, the familiar creak of leather and jingle of spurs marking his steady pace. At 43, he had learned to appreciate the quiet moments. They were becoming increasingly rare in this changing world. "Hi, how are you? I'm interrupting quickly just to ask you to click on the like button and subscribe to the channel. This will help a lot. Thank you, and I hope you like the story." The peaceful afternoon shattered like glass against stone when angry voices erupted from the town square. Loner's weathered hands tightened on the reins as he heard the unmistakable sound of mob fury, a sound that had haunted too many of his nightmares. Without hesitation, he spurred his horse toward the commotion. What he saw made his blood run cold. A circle of perhaps 30 townspeople had formed around something or someone in the center of the dusty square. Men he'd known for years stood with clenched fists and twisted faces, while women clutched their children close, their eyes filled with a fear that seemed disproportionate to whatever crime had been committed. "String him up!" shouted Marcus Webb, the town's blacksmith, his massive arms raised above his head. "We can't let this stand. He's just a boy," came a lone voice from the crowd. Mrs. Henderson, the school teacher, though even she sounded uncertain. "A boy who's brought nothing but trouble," Webb roared back. "Look what he's done. Look at the signs." Loner dismounted and pushed through the crowd, his presence immediately noticed. Conversations died as people stepped aside, some with relief, others with barely concealed resentment. In the center of the circle, he found the source of their fury. A boy, no more than 12 years old, crouched in the dirt with his arms wrapped protectively around his head. The child was thin, almost skeletal, with clothes that hung off his small frame like rags on a scarecrow. Dirt and what looked like dried blood streaked his face, but it was his eyes that struck Loner most. Wide, terrified, but holding a strange intelligence that seemed far too old for his years. "What's going on here?" Loner's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. Sheriff Coleman, a man who'd grown soft in his later years, stepped forward nervously. "Loner, you don't understand. This boy, he's brought something evil to our town. Strange things have been happening since he arrived." Strange things. Loner's gaze swept the crowd, noting how they avoided his eyes. "What kind of strange things?" "Livestock dying without cause," Webb interjected, his voice rising again. "Crops withering overnight. And the dreams? We've all been having the same nightmares since he showed up 3 days ago." Loner looked down at the boy who had lifted his head slightly. Around his neck hung a tarnished silver medallion, its surface so worn that any original design was impossible to discern. The boy's lips moved silently, but no sound emerged. "He won't speak," said Dr. Morrison, pushing his spectacles up his nose. "Not a word since we found him wandering the outskirts. But he carries that medallion, and there are markings on his body, strange symbols that none of us recognize." "So you decided to beat him?" Loner's voice carried a dangerous edge that made several people step back. "We're protecting our families." Webb's face had turned red with anger. "Whatever he is, whatever he's brought here, it needs to be stopped before—" "Before what?" Loner interrupted. "Before you murder a child based on superstition and fear." The crowd erupted in angry voices, but Loner had heard enough. He knelt beside the boy, who flinched at his approach. "Easy there, son," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The boy's eyes searched Loner's face, and for a moment, something passed between them. A recognition of shared loneliness, perhaps, or simply the desperate hope of someone who had been without kindness for too long. "This ends now," Loner announced, standing and facing the crowd. "The boy comes with me." "You can't," Sheriff Coleman protested. "Loner, you don't know what you're dealing with. The things we've seen—" "I know what I'm dealing with," Loner replied firmly. "A scared child who needs help, not a lynch mob." He extended his hand to the boy, who hesitated for only a moment before taking it. The child's fingers were ice cold despite the desert heat, and Loner could feel him trembling. "You're making a mistake," Webb called out as Loner helped the boy to his feet. "When the darkness comes for us all, remember that we tried to warn you." "The only darkness I see here is in your hearts," Loner shot back. He lifted the boy onto his horse and mounted behind him. "Anyone who wants to discuss this further knows where to find me." As they rode away from the square, Loner felt the weight of dozens of stares boring into his back. The boy remained silent, but he leaned slightly against Loner's chest, a small gesture that spoke volumes about his desperation for protection. The ride to Loner's ranch took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. The boy never spoke, never made a sound, but Loner could feel the tension gradually leaving the small body pressed against him. Whatever had happened to this child, whatever had brought him to Dustwood Creek, Loner was determined to get to the truth. His ranch sat in a valley surrounded by red rock formations, a modest but well-maintained spread that had been his sanctuary for the past 15 years. As they approached the main house, Loner noticed something that made him frown. His cattle were clustered at the far end of the pasture, as far from the house as they could get, and they seemed agitated. "Interesting," he murmured, more to himself than to the boy. Inside the house, Loner settled the child at his kitchen table and began preparing a simple meal. The boy watched his every movement with those unnaturally alert eyes, and Loner found himself wondering what horrors this child had witnessed to make him so wary. "You hungry, son?" Loner asked, setting a plate of beans and cornbread in front of the boy. The child nodded once, then fell upon the food with the desperation of someone who hadn't eaten in days. As he ate, Loner got his first good look at the markings Dr. Morrison had mentioned. Strange symbols were indeed carved into the boy's arms. Not tattoos, but actual scars that had been deliberately inflicted. They formed patterns that seemed almost familiar, though Loner couldn't place where he might have seen them before. The medallion around the boy's neck caught the lamplight, and for just a moment, Loner thought he could make out part of an inscription on its surface. But when he looked closer, it was just worn silver again. As night fell over the ranch, Loner made up a bed for the boy in his spare room. The child followed him silently, still clutching that mysterious medallion. Just before Loner closed the door, the boy looked up at him with those ancient eyes and mouthed a single word: "Thank you." Loner nodded and left the boy to rest, but sleep would not come easily for him that night. Outside his window, he could hear his cattle lowing restlessly, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a sound that seemed to carry more than the usual loneliness of the desert night. As he lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, Loner couldn't shake the feeling that by rescuing this boy, he had set something in motion that would change everything. The question was, Would he be strong enough to see it through to the end? Dawn broke gray and sullen over Dustwood Creek, as if the very sky reflected the town's troubled mood. Loner woke to find the boy already awake, sitting by the kitchen window and staring out at the horizon with those unsettling eyes. The child had eaten the breakfast Loner prepared, but remained as silent as a grave. "We need to get some answers," Loner said gently, settling into the chair across from the boy. "I know you can't, or won't, speak, but there are other ways to communicate." He placed paper and a pencil on the table. The boy looked at them for a long moment, then picked up the pencil with trembling fingers. His first attempt at writing was shaky, but the letters were clear enough. "Danger!" "What kind of danger?" Loner asked. The boy's hand moved more frantically now. "They lied. All of them." Before Loner could ask for clarification, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Through the window, he could see Sheriff Coleman riding up with 2 deputies, their faces grim with purpose. "Stay here," Loner instructed the boy, who immediately shrank back from the window. Outside, Sheriff Coleman dismounted with obvious reluctance. "Morning, Loner. We need to talk." "About what?" "About the boy. Things got worse after you left yesterday." Coleman's voice was strained. 3 more head of cattle found dead on the Morrison Ranch, all with the same strange markings carved into their hides. And Mrs. Patterson's well went dry overnight. Been flowing strong for 30 years, and now it's bone dry. Loner studied the sheriff's face. "And you think a 12-year-old boy is responsible for this?" "I think that boy is connected to something we don't understand," Coleman replied. "The town council met last night. They want him handed over to the territorial authorities." "On what charges?" "Suspicion of, well, we're not exactly sure. But Loner, you've got to see reason. Ever since that child arrived, nothing's been right. People are scared." "People are always scared of what they don't understand," Loner said. "Doesn't mean they're right to be." Deputy Hayes, a young man barely out of his teens, spoke up nervously. "Mr. Rancher, sir, my grandmother says she recognizes those symbols on the boy's arms. She says they're marks of the cursed." Loner's patience was wearing thin. "Your grandmother also thinks thunder is caused by angels bowling, Hayes." "This is different," Coleman insisted. "We found something else, something that changes everything." The sheriff reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "This belonged to Father Miguel, the priest who served here 20 years ago. We found it hidden in the old church basement." Loner took the journal and opened it. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting in Spanish, but scattered throughout were drawings, symbols that looked remarkably similar to the scars on the boy's arms. "Can you read Spanish?" Coleman asked. "Some." Loner flipped through the pages, his frown deepening. "This talks about rituals, protective rites, something about the chosen child and breaking the cycle of sin." "Keep reading," Coleman urged. Loner found a passage that made his blood run cold. In broken English mixed with Spanish, Father Miguel had written, "The boy must bear the marks willingly, for he alone can carry the weight of our collective guilt. The symbols will protect him from the darkness we have created, but the townspeople will not understand. They will see only what they fear, not what they have done." "What does it mean?" Deputy Hayes asked. Before Loner could answer, a commotion erupted from inside the house. They rushed in to find the boy standing in the middle of the kitchen, his eyes wide with terror, pointing at something only he could see. "What is it, son?" Loner asked. But the boy just shook his head frantically and pressed the medallion against his chest. That's when Loner noticed it. The medallion was glowing, not brightly, but with a soft, pulsing light that seemed to emanate from within the tarnished silver. "Dear God," Coleman whispered. "What is that thing?" The boy suddenly grabbed the pencil and paper, writing with desperate urgency. "They're coming. The guilty ones. They know I remember." "Remember what?" Loner asked, but the boy was already writing again. "The night they killed my family. The night they made the deal." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Coleman and his deputies exchanged glances, and Loner could see fear creeping into their eyes. But it was a different kind of fear now, the fear of men who suddenly realized they might be on the wrong side of justice. "What deal?" Loner pressed gently. The boy's hand shook as he wrote. "Gold. They found gold on our land. Killed mama, papa, sister. Thought they killed me too." "Jesus," Deputy Hayes breathed. "He's talking about the Martinez family." Coleman's face had gone pale. "That was 20 years ago. There was a fire. We were told it was an accident." "Lies," the boy wrote, his pencil moving so hard it nearly tore the paper. "They burned our house, took our land, divided the gold." Loner felt pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place. The symbols on his arms, they're not curses, they're protection marks. Someone tried to save him. The boy nodded vigorously and wrote, "Father Miguel, he found me, dying, gave me new name, new life, sent me away. But you came back," Loner said. "Had to. The medallion calls me home when the time is right." Coleman was backing toward the door. This is impossible. The Martinez family died in a fire. There was an investigation. An investigation led by who?" Loner asked pointedly. The sheriff's silence was answer enough. The boy wrote one more line, his letters now barely legible in his haste. "They know I'm alive. They'll come tonight." As if summoned by his words, the sound of many horses approaching echoed across the valley. Through the window, Loner could see a group of riders cresting the hill, at least a dozen men, and at their head rode Marcus Webb, the blacksmith who had been so eager to see the boy hanged. "They're not here to talk," Coleman said grimly. Loner checked his rifle and looked at the boy, who was clutching his medallion so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "Son, I need you to tell me, who else was involved in what happened to your family?" The boy's eyes met his, and for the first time since Loner had found him, the child spoke aloud, his voice barely a whisper, but clear as a bell. "Everyone." The single word hit Loner like a physical blow. He looked at Coleman, who was staring at the boy with dawning horror. "Everyone who matters in this town," the boy continued, his voice growing stronger. "The mayor, the banker, the judge, the sheriff before you. They all got their share of the gold. They all swore to keep the secret. And now you've come back to expose them," Loner said. The boy nodded. "The medallion. It holds the truth. Father Miguel blessed it with the last words of my family. When the time is right, it will show everyone what really happened." Outside, the riders had stopped at the edge of Loner's property. Webb's voice carried across the distance. "Send out the boy, rancher. This doesn't have to involve you." Loner moved to the window and called back. "The only place this boy is going is to the territorial capital, where he can tell his story to people who weren't involved in covering it up." "You don't understand," Webb shouted. "That boy is dangerous. He's not what he seems." "You're right," Loner replied. "He's not a helpless victim. He's a witness to murder." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Webb's voice came again, colder now. "Have it your way, rancher, but remember, you chose this." As the riders began to spread out, surrounding the ranch house, Loner realized that the real battle was just beginning. The boy, whose real name he still didn't know, had returned to claim justice for his murdered family. But first, they would have to survive the night. The Medallion pulsed brighter in the growing darkness, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled across the desert sky. Night fell like a curtain over the ranch, bringing with it an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant sounds of men positioning themselves around Loner's property. The boy, who had finally revealed his name as Diego Martinez, sat at the kitchen table, his medallion now glowing steadily in the lamplight. "Tell me about the medallion," Loner said, checking his ammunition for the third time. Diego's voice was stronger now, as if speaking his real name had given him back some of his power. "It belonged to my grandmother. She said it was blessed by a saint in the old country, that it would protect our family from evil men. And Father Miguel? He found me 3 days after the fire, more dead than alive. The medallion had protected me somehow. I should have died from the smoke and burns, but I didn't." Diego touched the silver disc reverently. He said God had spared me for a purpose. Sheriff Coleman, who had remained silent since the revelation, finally spoke. "Diego, if what you're saying is true, why didn't Father Miguel go to the authorities?" Diego's laugh was bitter, far too old for his 12 years. "He tried, but the authorities were the ones who did it. Sheriff Morrison, the one before Coleman. He was there that night. So was Judge Hartwell and Mayor Stevens. All dead now," Coleman said quietly. "All dead with their secrets," Diego corrected. "But their sons and friends are still here, still benefiting from blood money." Loner moved to the window and peered through the curtains. He could see the glow of cigarettes in the darkness, marking the positions of their besiegers. How many were involved? 15 men total. They called themselves the Prosperity Circle. Diego's eyes hardened. "They said our land was wasted on Mexican farmers, that they could make better use of it." "The gold mine," Coleman said suddenly. "The one that made this town rich. It's on what used to be Martinez land. My father found the gold first," Diego confirmed. "He was going to file a claim, make us rich legally. But they couldn't let that happen. Couldn't let a Mexican family control the biggest gold strike in the territory." A shot rang out, shattering the kitchen window. Loner pulled Diego to the floor as glass rained down around them. "Rancher!" Webb's voice carried through the night. "Last chance. Send out the boy, and we'll let you live." "Counter offer!" Loner shouted back. "You all ride away now, and I won't tell the territorial marshal about the mass grave I found on the old Martinez property." The silence that followed was telling. Loner hadn't actually found any grave, but the reaction suggested he was close to the truth. "You're bluffing," came another voice. Mayor Stevens Jr., if Loner wasn't mistaken. "Am I?" Loner called back. "Funny thing about secrets, Stevens. They have a way of coming to light, especially when there's a witness who survived to tell the tale." More shots peppered the house, forcing them to take cover behind the thick wooden table. Coleman was sweating profusely, his hands shaking as he gripped his pistol. "I didn't know," he kept repeating. "I swear I didn't know." "But you suspected," Diego said quietly. "You all suspected." The story never made sense. A family of 5 dying in a fire with no survivors. Their land conveniently going up for auction the next week. The medallion, Loner said suddenly. You said it holds the truth. What did you mean? Diego smiled for the first time since Loner had met him. Father Miguel was clever. He blessed it not just for protection, but as a witness. Watch. The boy held the medallion up to the lamplight, and suddenly the worn surface began to shimmer. Images appeared in the silver, faint at first, then growing clearer. Loner found himself looking at scenes from 20 years ago. A family around a dinner table, a man showing his wife a nugget of gold, children playing in a yard. Then the images turned dark. Men on horseback approaching a small house, torches being lit. A family herded outside at gunpoint. Dear God, Coleman whispered. It's like watching it happen. The medallion showed everything. The execution of Diego's parents, the burning of his sister, the house being set ablaze. And through it all, the faces of the killers were clearly visible. Younger versions of men Loner recognized from town. This is impossible, Coleman said, but he couldn't look away from the images. Father Miguel said the medallion was touched by divine justice, Diego explained. It records the truth, preserves it until the time comes for judgment. A new voice called from outside, Dr. Morrison. Boy, we know you're in there. We know what you think you remember, but you're wrong. It was an accident. Diego stood up, his fear replaced by righteous anger. Show yourselves, cowards. Face the truth of what you did. We're not the cowards here, Morrison shouted back. You're the one hiding behind lies and superstition. Then come and see for yourselves. Diego held the medallion high, and its glow intensified, casting strange shadows on the walls. Come and face the witness you thought you'd silenced. The shooting stopped. In the sudden quiet, Loner could hear heated arguments among the besiegers. Some wanted to continue the assault, but others seemed shaken by Diego's words. The medallion, Coleman said slowly, if it really shows what happened, it's evidence, legal evidence, evidence that would hang half the town, Loner pointed out, evidence that would bring justice, Diego corrected. A new sound reached them, the thunder of many horses approaching fast. But these weren't more townspeople. The rhythm was different, more disciplined. Cavalry, Coleman said with relief. Someone must have sent word to Fort Bravado. Through the broken window, Loner could see torches approaching from the east. A bugle call echoed across the valley, and suddenly the men surrounding the ranch were caught between the house and a troop of federal cavalry. This is Captain Morrison of the United States Army, a voice boomed through the darkness. Lay down your weapons immediately. The siege collapsed in minutes. Faced with federal troops, the townspeople had no choice but to surrender. As the cavalry secured the area, Loner helped Diego to his feet. How did they know to come? Loner asked. Diego smiled and touched his medallion. I sent a letter before I came to town. Told them I was the sole survivor of the Martinez family massacre and that I had evidence of the conspiracy. I knew they'd come eventually. You planned all this? Father Miguel taught me that justice delayed is not justice denied, only justice waiting for the right moment. Diego's eyes were bright with tears, but they were tears of relief, not sorrow. I've been waiting 20 years for this moment. Captain Morrison, no relation to the town doctor, entered the house with 2 soldiers. He was a stern man with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much of the frontier's darker side. You must be Diego Martinez, he said gently. We received your letter. I'm sorry it took us so long to get here. You came when you were needed, Diego replied. That's what matters. The captain looked at the medallion, which was still glowing softly. Is it true what you wrote about the evidence? Diego nodded and held up the medallion. Everything is here. Every face, every crime. Father Miguel blessed it to preserve the truth until justice could be served. As the captain watched the images play across the medallion's surface, his expression grew grimmer. This is extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it. Divine justice, Diego said simply. Some things are too important to be left to human memory alone. Outside, the arrested townspeople were being loaded into wagons for transport to the territorial capital. Some went quietly, resigned to their fate. Others protested their innocence, but their words rang hollow in the face of the medallion's testimony. As dawn broke over the valley, Loner found himself standing on his porch with Diego, watching the last of the cavalry disappear over the horizon with their prisoners. "What will you do now?" Loner asked. Diego looked out over the land that had once belonged to his family. "Reclaim what's mine. Build something good on ground that's been watered with too much blood. You'll need help. Are you offering?" Loner smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in years. "I reckon I am. A boy shouldn't have to face the world alone." Diego's answering smile was radiant. "Then I accept. But I'm not just a boy anymore, am I? I'm Diego Martinez, son of Carlos and Maria, brother to Elena and little Miguel. I'm the keeper of their memory and the guardian of their justice." "Yes," Loner agreed. "Yes, you are." As they walked back into the house together, the medallion's glow finally faded, its purpose fulfilled. But the light it had brought to the darkness would shine on, a beacon of hope in a world that too often forgot the difference between justice and vengeance. The truth had set them all free. 3 months had passed since the night of the siege, and Dustwood Creek was a town transformed. The trials in the territorial capital had been swift and decisive. The medallion's testimony, backed by Diego's witness account and evidence uncovered by federal investigators, had resulted in convictions for conspiracy, murder, and theft of federal land grants. Loner Rancher, who had learned his real name was Samuel Harrison, though everyone still called him Loner, stood on the porch of the newly rebuilt Martinez house, watching Diego direct the construction of a new barn. The boy had grown in those 3 months, not just in height, but in confidence and purpose. "Mr. Loner," Diego called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "The foundation's ready for inspection." Loner smiled and walked over to examine the work. The barn was being built on the exact spot where the original Martinez home had stood, but this time it would house hope instead of tragedy. "Looks solid," Loner approved. "Your father would be proud." Diego's eyes grew distant for a moment. "I dreamed about him last night. He said the land remembers everything, the good and the bad. But now it can start remembering good things again." The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. A small group of riders was coming up the valley road, not with the aggressive intent of that terrible night, but with the hesitant approach of people seeking forgiveness. At the head of the group rode Mrs. Henderson, the school teacher, followed by several families that had remained in town after the trials. Many of the guilty had fled or been imprisoned, leaving Dustwood Creek a shadow of its former self. "Diego," Mrs. Henderson called out as she dismounted. "We've come to apologize and to ask if there's anything we can do to help." Diego studied the group carefully. These were people who had been afraid, who had believed the lies because it was easier than facing the truth. But they weren't the ones who had pulled triggers or lit torches. "You can help by making sure something like this never happens again," Diego said finally. "By teaching your children that fear and hatred only breed more of the same." Mrs. Henderson nodded, tears in her eyes. "We've already started. The new school curriculum will include the true history of what happened here. Your family's story will be told and remembered. And we've established a fund," added Mr. Patterson, the store owner, "for the church and the school. We want to name them after your family, if you'll allow it." Diego looked at Loner, who nodded encouragingly. That would be good," Diego said. "But I have a condition." "Anything," Mrs. Henderson said quickly. "The church and school must be open to everyone. Mexican, Anglo, Indian, it doesn't matter. My parents believed that education and faith could bring people together. Let's prove them right." The group agreed enthusiastically, and as they prepared to leave, Mrs. Henderson approached Diego privately. "There's something else," she said quietly. "We found something when we were cleaning out the old church basement. Father Miguel left more than just his journal." She handed Diego a small wooden box, worn smooth by age. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, were 3 more medallions, smaller than the one Diego wore, but clearly made by the same hand. "He made them for your siblings," Mrs. Henderson explained. "There's a note saying they were blessed to keep your family together, even in death." Diego's hands trembled as he lifted the medallions. Each one bore the name of a family member, Elena, Miguel, and one marked simply, "Mama y Papa." "He never forgot them," Diego whispered. "None of us should have," Mrs. Henderson replied. "That's why we're here, to remember and to do better." After the townspeople left, Loner found Diego sitting by the small cemetery he'd created behind the house. 4 wooden crosses marked the graves where he'd buried the remains found in the ruins of the original home, and now he was placing the smaller medallions on each grave. "They're together again," Diego said as Loner sat beside him. "They never really left you," Loner replied. "Family doesn't end with death. Father Miguel used to say that. He said love is the one thing that can't be destroyed by hatred or fear." Diego touched his own medallion, which had remained dormant since that night 3 months ago. "I think that's why the medallion worked. It wasn't just about justice. It was about love. Love for my family. Love for the truth. And now? Now I have a new family," Diego said, looking at Loner with a smile. "And new responsibilities. The territorial governor wants me to testify before Congress about land rights and protection for Mexican families. He says my story could help change laws." Loner felt a surge of pride. "You'll do well. You've got your father's courage and your mother's wisdom. And I've got you," Diego added. "The man who risked everything to save a stranger's life." "You were never a stranger," Loner said. "From the moment I saw you in that square, I knew you were family. Sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about choice." As the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Diego stood and brushed the dust from his clothes. "Come on," he said. "Mrs. Patterson is bringing dinner tonight, and she promised to teach me how to make my mother's favorite bread recipe. She learned it from Mama years ago, before everything went wrong." They walked back to the house together. The man who had found his purpose in protecting the innocent, and the boy who had found his strength in seeking justice. Behind them, the medallions caught the last rays of sunlight, glowing softly on the graves of those who had not died in vain. In the distance, the lights of Dustwood Creek began to twinkle in the gathering darkness. It was a smaller town now, humbled by the truth of its past, but it was also a better town. The fear and hatred that had poisoned it for 20 years were gone, replaced by something more powerful, the possibility of redemption. Diego had returned not just to claim his inheritance, but to heal a community's wounded soul. And in doing so, he had given loner rancher Samuel Harrison something he had never expected to find again: a family and a reason to believe in the goodness that could exist in the world. As they reached the porch, Diego paused and looked back at the cemetery one more time. "Gracias, familia," he whispered. "Rest in peace. Justice has been served, and love has won." The medallion around his neck pulsed once, gently, and then was still. Its work was done, but the legacy it had protected would live on in the boy who wore it, the man who had saved him, and the town that had learned to choose love over fear. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much and come back often.